The organization of science. Greek science before Aristotle. Socrates, says Renan, gave philosophy to mankind, and Aristotle gave it to science. There was philosophy before Socrates and science before Aristotle, and since Socrates and since Aristotle, philosophy and science have made immense advances. But all has been built upon the foundation which they laid. Before Aristotle, science was an embryo. With him it was born. Earlier civilizations than the Greek had made attempts at science, but so far as we can catch their thought through their still obscure cuneiform and hieroglyphic script, their science was indistinguishable from theology. That is to say, these pre-Hellenic peoples explained every obscure operation in nature by some supernatural agency. Everywhere there were gods. Apparently it was the Ionian Greeks who first dared to give natural explanations of cosmic complexities and mysterious events. They sought in physics the natural causes of particular incidents, and in philosophy a natural theory of the whole. Thales, 640 to 550 BC, the father of philosophy, was primarily an astronomer, who astonished the natives of Miletus by informing them that the sun and stars, which they were wont to worship as gods, were merely balls of fire. His pupil, Anaximander, 610 to 540 BC, the first Greek to make astronomical and geographical charts, believed that the universe had begun as an undifferentiated mass, from which all things had arisen by the separation of opposites, that astronomic history periodically repeated itself in the evolution and dissolution of an infinite number of worlds, that the earth was at rest in space by a balance of internal impulsions, like Buridan's ass, that all our planets had once been fluid but had been evaporated by the sun, that life had first been formed in the sea but had been driven upon the land by the subsidence of the water, that of these stranded animals some had developed the capacity to breathe air and had so become the progenitors of all later land life, that man could not from the beginning have been what he now was, for if man on his first appearance had been so helpless at birth and had required so long an adolescence, as in these later days, he could not possibly have survived. Anaximenes, another Milesian, who flourished around 450 BC, described the primeval condition of things as a very rarefied mass, gradually condensing into wind, cloud, water, earth, and stone. The three forms of matter, gas, liquid, and solid, were progressive stages of condensation. Heat and cold were merely rarefaction and condensation. Earthquakes were due to the solidification of an originally fluid earth. Life and soul were one, an animating and expansive force present in everything, everywhere. Anaxagoras, 500 to 428 BC, teacher of Pericles, seems to have given a correct explanation of solar and lunar eclipses. He discovered the processes of respiration in plants and fishes, and he explained man's intelligence by the power of manipulation that came when the forelimbs were freed from the tasks of locomotion. Slowly, in these men, knowledge grew into science. Heraclitus, 530 to 470 BC, who left wealth and its cares to live a life of poverty and study in the shade of the temple porticos at Ephesus, turned science from astronomy to earthlier concerns. All things forever flow and change, he said. Even in the stillest matter there is unseen flux and movement. Cosmic history runs in repetitious cycles, each beginning and ending in fire. Here is one source of the Stoic and Christian doctrine of last judgment and hell. Through strife, says Heraclitus, all things arise and pass away. War is the father and king of all. Some he has made gods and some men, some slaves and some free. Where there is no strife, there is decay. The mixture which is not shaken decomposes. In this flux of change and struggle and selection, only one thing is constant, and that is law. This order, the same for all things, no one of gods or men has made, but it always was and is and shall be. Empedocles, who flourished around 445 BC in Sicily, developed to a further stage the idea of evolution. Organs arise not by design, but by selection. Nature makes many trials and experiments with organisms, combining organs variously. Where the combination meets environmental needs, the organism survives and perpetuates its like. Where the combination fails, the organism is weeded out. As time goes on, organisms are more and more intricately and successfully adapted to their surroundings. Finally, in Leucippus, who flourished around 445 BC, and Democritus, 460 to 360 BC, master and pupil in Thracian Abdera, we get the last stage of pre-Aristotelian science, materialistic deterministic atomism. Everything, said Leucippus, is driven by necessity. In reality, said Democritus, there are only atoms and the void. Perception is due to the expulsion of atoms from the object upon the sense organ. There is, or have been, or will be an infinite number of worlds. At every moment, planets are colliding and dying, and new worlds are rising out of chaos by the selective aggregation of atoms of similar size and shape. There is no design. The universe is a machine. This, in dizzy and superficial summary, is the story of Greek science before Aristotle. Its cruder items can be well forgiven when we consider the narrow circle of experimental and observational equipment within which these pioneers were compelled to work. The stagnation of Greek industry under the incubus of slavery prevented the full development of these magnificent beginnings, and the rapid complication of political life in Athens turned the sophists and Socrates and Plato away from physical and biological research into the paths of ethical and political theory. It is one of the many glories of Aristotle that he was broad and brave enough to compass and combine these two lines of Greek thought, the physical and the moral. That going back beyond his teacher, he caught again the thread of scientific development in the pre-Socratic Greeks, carried on their work with more resolute detail and more varied observation, and brought together all the accumulated results in a magnificent body of organized science.